Yes, you do. Interesting, so I help.
I loved your sermon today. That was great. I love
Always nice to get
Kind of a strange song. It was,
education.
it was,
Yeah, it was very educational.
I think we should practice forgiveness for the snakes.
Not the one that bit today.
What happened to that snake? Is he deceased?
no, I left that snake right where he was. So,
So you forgave that snake for biting you?
oh, yeah. You know, it was just being a snake.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if it
And
was.
for all I mean, it was dark. I think I might have actually stepped on it. So he had good reason to bite. Oh, the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Gracious Father, whose blessed Son, Jesus Christ, came down from heaven to be the true bread which gives life to the world, evermore give us this bread. That He may live in us and we in him, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. It's our collect from the day for the day. It draws, of course, mainly from the bread of life discourse, which is one of the centerpieces of the Gospel of John. So we're going to be continuing our deep dive into John. I want to focus today mainly on the first part of the gospel, which, as we know, is the book of signs. John, as we've said, is kind of broken up into two parts, the book of signs and the book of glory. And so we're going to be talking mostly about the book of signs today. We're going to talk about the 7 signs, and we'll talk about some of the 7 I am statements. So again, there's 7 of each, out an accident. And I'm going to see if I can write these real quickly up on the board. That's hard to remember it. Anybody name any of the signs from John's gospel?
You think of a blind man.
Healing the blind man.
Turning me on.
Wine, that's the wedding of Canaan, it's often called. What else?
Healing of the lame man.
Healing man.
What about the cleansing of the temple?
Don't believe that's considered a sign.
Sign.
Walking on the water.
I don't believe that's considered one. I mean, no, you're right. So,
Is it? Oh, the whole last one considered?
yes, that's the last of the signs.
It's the beating of the 5,000.
That's 6, so we're missing 1. That is the healing of a royal official's sin. That's one of the early signs. How about the I am statements? What are those?
I am.
Well, that's an I am statement made by somebody besides Jesus.
That's true.
So Jesus made 7 I am statements in John's gospel.
In the light of the world,
Light of the world, right?
bread of life.
The great. Yeah,
I'm sorry, what was that?
that was, I'm the great. Is that Tony, you're great. I thought you said I'm the great. But that may be wrong. That's fine.
You did say at times simply I am. I don't know if that's considered. I'm the light of the world, I'm the bread of life. A good shepherd, that's a favorite, right?
The way of the truth and the life.
Or we're missing 3. I'm divine, believe when he's going to raise the Lazarus is when he says, I am the resurrection. and life."
I am going away.
I'm going away. That's not considered an I am
Oh,
statement.
okay.
So most of these I am statements are going to be metaphorical in nature. And remember, these are John's version, sort of the parables that would play that role to some degree.
We have the people.
One more. The gate, I'm the gate.
Oh.
Kind of an odd one, isn't it?
Not really, because he was the gate for his sheep to come in.
Mhm. Yeah, and in a sense, this I'm the gate is a metaphorical way of saying I am the way.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so those tying together, each of these I am statements reveals something in kind of poetic language about the nature of who Jesus is. And again, this is kind of what the Gospel of John is about. It's about Jesus' identity. Focuses more on Jesus' identity than the other Gospels do. And the same thing with each of these signs. Each of these signs is followed by a discourse from Jesus, kind of explaining what the sign means. And usually, well, that sign is almost always going to have to do with Jesus' identity. So again, this is very, very different. And I think these are just good things to remember about the Gospel of John, because these are really, in a sense, the pillars around which the entire gospel is built. Almost all of these occur in the first part of John, the book of signs. I think that I am the way, the truth, and the life occurs during the Last Supper. That's in the book of Glory. So there are a couple of these that are going to occur later on towards the end of Jesus' ministry, but most of them are included as part of the book of signs. And again, just a reminder of just how different John is from the synoptic gospels. I think one of the estimates that I saw is that 90% of John is not found in any of the other gospels. So that's a pretty high percentage. So very, very different. Are there any of these signs or I am statements that y'all would like to talk about? I don't have a whole lot of prepared stuff. I just wanted to maybe have some discussion around some of these.
a whole dialogue of healing the blind man.
Mhm.
And what that sets up is, it's very complicated as far as, was he blind because of the sin of his parents or his own sin? And, I don't know. He says he's obviously a prophet,
Mhm.
but there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
And it's a very complicated discourse, I think, in terms of how that's all laid out. But eventually it gets back to, I am the light of the world.
Mhm. And that's a great example of one of these signs and then lengthy discourses. Let's see, where in John is that? Does anybody have that?
The light that way?
The man, what's that?
Are you talking about the I am the light?
The man born blind.
Chapter 9, I think.
9, did you say?
Yeah. It's from 40.
So if Mark told similar tales, all the synoptics tell versions, I think, of Jesus healing somebody who's blind. There's the one that's called the kind of the incomplete healing, where Jesus heals somebody's of their blindness, but doesn't quite take all the way. Jesus has to try again. Remember where the man says, I see shapes, but it's like trees walking. So then Jesus has to finish the job. But usually in any of the synoptics, Jesus is gonna heal somebody and then move on to the next healing. In this one, first of all, it's specified that this is a man who was born blind. And this is not a throwaway detail, it's an important one, because Jesus is talking here, he's being asked, well, who sinned? The man or his parents that he was born blind? So the assumption being that blindness is a curse that has been brought about by sinful behavior. So if the man was born blind, then we know pretty unlikely that there was anything that he did to deserve being born blind. So it's probably going to be on the parents. So interestingly, we have the way in which Jesus heals this man. It goes into this detail about him spitting on the ground and making mud. This may very well be a reference to Genesis and to the creation of Adam and Eve from the dirt of the ground. And then the man's eyes are opened. And this, of course, occurs on a Sabbath day. So again, all these little details are very, very significant, as John tells them. John is really kind of one of the good things about John that I like is that John is just packed with meaning. I mean, you can read John over and over and over again and get very different things about it each time. So healing somebody on the Sabbath would have been considered unacceptable by many of the legalists at the time. And so Jesus gets into trouble for that. And then we've got this long kind of, they go to the man, they go to the man's parents, they go back to the man. And so this kind of goes on, and the parents are trying to kind of avoid getting into any trouble. And eventually, and of course, you've got some real humor in here. I believe, yeah, when they asked the man, how did he open your eyes? He answered them, I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? This is just textbook Jewish humor, right? I mean, this is just ripping with sarcasm. So I love seeing that kind of biblical humor that I think we sometimes miss. And at the end, he winds up getting thrown out of the synagogue, I believe the man born blind does. This is considered generally to be textual evidence of what may have happened to some of these early Christians, that there had been conflict between the Christian Jews and the Pharisaic Jews, and eventually the Christians had been thrown out of many of the places of worship. So we see that reflected here in this text.
Those of you who like The Chosen in season 4, they're now doing. It shows a very good example of this. They do a really good job of that, and also with the healing of this official son. So they do a great job of that. So it just reminded me as you're going over and reading it, have this vision, it's almost to the T how they did it.
Okay.
So, some of you like The Chosen in here, so.
Yeah, and as I've said, I've watched very little of it. I mean, I think the only episode I've ever actually seen was the pilot. I'm just not a big TV watcher. I was very impressed with that pilot. It included all these details that are not in the Bible, but I thought that it was very true to the Bible itself, and I thought it was very thought provoking.
Seems like it follows Mark.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
From what I've watched, yeah, I think more so than any of the other books, but it's really good.
There's a wonderful setup, the theme of forgiveness that's going through the Legend series.
Mhm.
There's a wonderful setup in this between Mark, who's a little twit all the way through this thing, and Peter. And Mark snitches on him, and there's some taxes that need to be paid, and this episode that Jesus tells Peter they has to confront Matthew and forgive him. And the tension and how that's done is beautifully portrayed. It's worth the whole thing, just the way they tell that story, and it's very powerful.
That's great. That's great.
And they do a great job, and to me, it's all the disciples are ordinary people with a lot of faults. And I just love that you really relate to them. They're not some powerful, whatever, they're just ordinary people.
Right. And again, that's very much the way that they're portrayed in Gospels. I mean, we tend to look back and kind of glorify the disciples. Pretty much universally portrayed as buffoons and cowards. So I like that. It's good stuff.
Just like us.
Yeah, exactly. Just like us. Just like us. If there's hope for them, then there's hope for anybody, including us. So this is part of the good news. Part of the good news.
I think Angel Studios is doing real. I think it's a limited vehicle that's putting on his productions. Informed and they, I don't know how they choose who they're making these productions about. Cabrini one coming up. And I saw streaming of invitation, and chapel stuff. I think it's reaching people. I mean, I know it is. Anyway, there's a vision to portray the humanity of humans that, redeeming. So through salvation.
So it's a great evangelistic tool. Some places that use it as a part of their whole Bible study. So it's like they'll watch it and then discuss it.
Because it's a good show. That's a good.
Yeah, and these stories come out of an oral tradition. So most of these weren't even written down for a very long time. These are stories that were told, often in church. And so these are just different means of telling these stories. So I think it's great for something that's visual, that is perhaps more engaging and relatable than just sitting down and reading the Bible. Because at the end of the day, the gospel is also just a great story, isn't it? And that's especially true of the synoptics. It's all about the story, kind of drawing you into that story. John lends itself less well to making a movie or a TV show, probably. Most people would probably turn off their TV after about a half hour of Jesus flapping his gums about.
I don't know, but they sure like him in his Revelations.
Yeah.
We use that a lot.
Uh-huh. So yeah, I think that that's a great story, like healing of the man born blind. Any of the other signs or I am statements that y'all feel drawn to?
Drawn to good show.
I'm the good shepherd. Yeah, that one's pretty hard to beat. We all love that one. The at Christmas, you'll often hear preachers talk about how, you know, the angel appearing to the shepherds was unusual because shepherds at the time were considered kind of second or third class citizens. They were looked upon, they were looked down upon as kind of shifty and dubious characters. And that's true, I think, from all that we can learn about the time. It's also true that the shepherd was also a symbol of kingship throughout the ancient Mideast. This was very, very common, going back thousands and thousands of years, not just within Judaism, within so many different cultures in the Middle East. So when Jesus talks about being a good shepherd, this is an obvious allusion to his divinity and his kingship. This is messianic language. So we see it as beautiful and comforting, which it is. It also was seen by many of the leaders of the day as into divinity that they would have believed he had no right to. So this is a kind of a subversive claim and a deliberate challenge.
When you take the whole linkage back to King David, who,
Mhm.
when Samuel comes to find the next king, where is he? He's out tending the flock,
That's right.
taking care of the flock. I mean, you have that linkage. And then, to me, the powerful story of the good shepherd. And then I think first year of VFM, I did a PR on the Chichester songs of Leonard Bernstein.
Mhm.
And this idea of bringing all of the nations under the shepherd flock of Jesus is a theme that runs all the way to Revelation. So he does a beautiful job with Psalm 23.
Mhm.
And it's just one of the things I cling to in terms of just beautiful setting of this thing. And it's got the most beautiful child's voice that hasn't changed yet. And he tells the story with a heart. And then in the middle, there's a big thump of brass drums. And it goes into Psalm 2, which says, "Why do the nations rage?" And it's just a battle. It's a fight that goes on, and you hear it. And then it comes back to the theme comes back at the end. And it is this beautiful child's voice says, "And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." And it ties these themes beautifully together. And I'm still messing with Psalm 82, so I'm figuring out how to pull all this together. But it's a powerful theme, the shepherd, and I don't know what you say, the end of all the chaos in the world comes through the shepherdship of Jesus.
Yeah, and that's a great contrast of what earthly kingship looks like and what heavenly kingship looks like. You know, when on earth, when people take kingship, usually things don't turn out well for anybody. And, you know, all the violence, the wars we see in the world have a lot to do with what happens when somebody like Vladimir Putin takes kingship upon himself. And in the reign of God, the kingship is going to look a lot more like a good shepherd who draws all people to himself and unifies all of creation, so there shall be one flock shepherd. It's a beautiful scene that, again, you're right, it echoes Psalm 23. That would have been that Psalm 23, which we know and love so well. The Jewish people that Jesus was talking to would have equally known and loved this psalm. So again, it was not lost to them what Jesus was talking about when he said, "I am the good shepherd."
Now, how does that lead? The part that's confusing me is there's two shepherd stories here, and the gate, the sheep's gate. And that one's not clearly.
So you're talking about the two shepherd things being, I'm the good shepherd and I am the gate?
Gate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's only one way, and that's through Jesus.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that is a claim that is going to be made in the Gospel of John. I don't think that claim is going to be made in any of the other Gospels. And it has been a point of contention ever since. Because again, I mean, Jesus is going to make the same claim here. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. I am the resurrection. So that these are kind of exclusive claims that Jesus is going to make about access to God that is not going to be made in any of the other gospels. And this is something that we have to acknowledge and we have to kind of maybe wrestle with. And different people are going to resolve this issue in different ways, but there's always going to be a tension. It's not one or the other. Does that make sense? I mean, you have to, I think we have to acknowledge that there are very different claims made in these different gospels. And they're not always easy to resolve. One of our former presiding bishops, Catherine Jefferts Schori, got in trouble with a lot of people back in the day when somebody asked her in an interview, is Jesus the only access that we have to God? And this is the kind of trick question that the Pharisees probably would have asked Jesus, where there's not a good answer. But what she said is, wouldn't it be arrogant of us to assume that there's only one way that God can work? Aren't we just limiting God when we do that? Which I thought was a great answer, but it got her in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, because the way you phrase it was more of a question.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, she kind of put it, wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
I think her answer was more a question, which is not a bad. That's a really good way to have an interview.
Yeah, and I could be, I may not be remembering this exactly right. I need
How
to go
you
back
did it
and
is
look.
great.
But I find these claims to exclusivity to be a little bit difficult. And, it has always raised issues about what about people who lived before Jesus? What about people who live in parts of the world that have never heard about Jesus? Are they all going to hell? I don't think so. I think that salvation is God's intent for all of his children. That's right. It reminds me of some of the some of the debates that we had at council and some of the things that I hear about electronic, gathering electronically, things like Zoom and all these things. And I find myself in this uncomfortable position of defending technology. Because the limitations are ours. God is not limited. The Holy Spirit can work through Zoom, I promise. It may be hard for us to perceive that happening, but it's happening.
No, I don't feel the Holy Spirit patting me on the shoulder and saying, calm down, calm down. If it doesn't work, don't smash the computer.
That's right, that's right. Yeah, we all need help with that.
I just want you to buy a new one, that's just.
But maybe that's why the popularity of going back to Celtic spirituality,
Mhm.
everything, sacredness of everything,
Mhm.
it's just a different, it's not as rigid way of looking at things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. That's true. And I think that John is going to make exclusive claims as to Jesus and his identity, but also if we look at all these signs and all these I am statements, there's a way in which John is really opening up kind of who Jesus is, opening up the imagination. Portraying Jesus in a very kind of a rich way in terms of his identity. So yes, John is going to insist that Jesus is the Son of God, the pre-existent word through which everything was created. But that's not the end of the story for John. John is a lot more nuanced than a lot of people really recognize a lot of. Any other of these signs or I am statements that grab any of y'all?
I think the first story in this gospel without the wedding at Cana
Mm-hmm.
and the linkage to the tree vine, and it's only through the pruning and care for that that the fruit that will bear goodness throughout mankind is there's a connection between those two stories, and I think
Yeah, I think so too. This vine imagery is, again, this is something that you'll see in the Old Testament, some of the older scriptures, particularly in Isaiah. You'll see this image of the people of Israel as this grapevine. And yeah, this wedding of Cana, among other things, one of the things that's unique about the Gospel of John relative to the Synoptics is that there is no institution of Holy Communion in John. So in all the other Gospels, you've got the Last Supper in which Jesus institutes communion, saying, take and eat, this is my body, this is my blood. None of that. In John, instead, Jesus washes the disciples' feet and talks for a really long time. What I see in John, we believe that John was written later than the other synoptics. And when you see things like the wedding at Cana, the feeding of the 5,000, I think that Eucharist is not instituted because it's assumed. This to me, there's Eucharistic language throughout the Gospel of John. So you see that in the feeding of the 5,000. About Jesus speaking explicitly about, I am the bread that came down from heaven. You must, unless you eat me, you have no life in you. So again, there's just this assumption by now people are probably have been practicing communion for some time. So John doesn't need to tell that story. John instead is going to kind of illustrate what that means, illustrate it in different ways.
Some of the things that have stuck out to me are a little different from some of that, but it's the one on, I'm the light of the world, but also I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Mhm.
The reason why, for me, in my life, I need an example and something to follow. And I use that a lot about the light of the world concept, because you know, how many times have I covered that light in a bushel? It talks about that later on as well, but and the Jesus to me is the light to follow, and in darkness, if you don't have anything to follow, you end up just going farther and farther in darkness.
Get the snake there.
Right. No, I think that's right.
And then the I am the way, the truth, and the life. It tells me that I've always believed that I need to be like Jesus. I need to live like Jesus lived. I'm not Jesus, but how do I live like Jesus? How do I become like Jesus?
Mhm.
And that's, well, by following his example. Like, how many times have we not, you know, what was that wristband that everybody used to wear? What would Jesus do?
Yeah,
So anyway, that's something I was thinking of, is
yeah.
the light of the world. And even at the church, we're the light of the world. How do we know that light?
Mhm. And this is a favorite Johannine image, light, light and darkness. In the prologue, I think it says, you know, that the light was coming into the world. So again, this is going back to Jesus' divinity as the light that was in the beginning. It's coming into the world, and darkness could not overcome it. We're going to see that you will see light and dark used over and over and over again in John. And I think that these are powerful images, which can be problematic in a way. Now, Patty is correct, and this is something, this did not escape me, that snake bit me because I didn't see it because it was dark. You know, if I'd had a flashlight with me, I probably would not have stepped on that snake. So, you know, there's some danger to darkness, and darkness is also, I tend to love darkness. Being bit by a snake has not cured me of my love of snakes, nor my love of darkness. There's a great Barbara Brown Taylor on learning to walk in the dark, which I really recommend. I've read it, it's beautiful. Towards the beginning of John, there are a couple of stories that are intended to go together. One is Nicodemus, right, who doesn't get it. He's a Pharisee who doesn't get it. And Jesus, he comes to Jesus at midnight, we're told. And then the story immediately following is of a Samaritan woman who does get it. That story takes place at noon. So, I mean, there's this contrast between light and darkness you see throughout John. One of the most powerful places, let's see if I can find that, is when Jesus is betrayed. I'm not going to be able to find it, but anyways, we're told that Judas, the devil entered into Judas. They're in the upper room. Jesus is teaching, and it says Judas went out, and it was night. It's again, this is not a minor detail. What's that?
And then hung himself, right?
Well, this is before that,
Okay.
and I don't remember. Judas comes to different ends depending on what you're
Probably
reading.
couldn't stay in the light. He probably had to be in the darkness. I mean, who knows? Why did you sleep?
Mhm. And I think that in today's gospel text, again from the Gospel of John, this is the judgment, that the light has come into the world, and the people love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For all who do evil hate the light and do not come to the light, so that their deeds may not be exposed. But those who do what is true come to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that their deeds have been done in God. So again, this is great. This is classic John, all this light and dark stuff. Now, we're going to spend a little bit of time next week talking about some of the problematic aspects of John. One of them is that this language that we assume about light and dark and good and evil, white and black. I mean, a lot of this has become embedded in our culture, in Christian cultures. And it can be problematic for people of color. I know a woman who's, she's the Bishop of Vermont. And she's an African-American woman. And
Very powerful too.
yeah, she's she's up in Vermont. Her crozier was actually made by a friend of ours. It's beautiful. But she has spoken out on many occasions, as a number of African-American leaders in the church have, about the ways in which darkness is portrayed as synonymous with evil. And so it's hard to know what we're going to do about that. We have to be cautious about altering scripture, I think, but we have to also find ways to talk about some of the ways in which the metaphorical language in scripture has been and can still be today problematic. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting subject. One of my favorite books, probably my favorite book, is The Lord of the Rings, which draws heavily on this Johannine language of good and evil, black and white, dark and daylight. And so
in Star Wars, the father's name was, the main guy is Darth Vader, Darth Father.
and he's entirely black,
Yes, right.
you know. Watch some of the old westerns, you can tell who the hero is. He's wearing a white hat.
Johnny Cash, what a good guy.
That's right. Johnny Cash, breaking the mold, man in black. I don't know, any thoughts about that? It's
You know, this idea of here the Pharisees and Sadducees have a pretty good deal. They don't want anybody to come and rock the boat. And they probably see the truth in what Jesus is teaching, and they want to stop it because it might affect them. And I don't know, that's kind of the darkness at work here. And you sort of have to read between some of the lines. It's the resistance. The story that we started out with about the man, they keep asking him because they say, oh no, we're going to lose our position here. And they do. I mean, very shortly, 40 years after this happens, the temple and everything is gone. So it's, you kind of have to just, this whole idea is leave things well enough alone. Don't rock the boat, and it kind of happens. So, but it's kind of the darkness playing out, that discussion. So.
yeah. And darkness can be dangerous. I mean, I think about the snake, and I think within the context of church about some of the horrible things that have been done throughout church history by leaders of the church. And those were things that were done in the dark.
How they make heaven. I mean, they were, you know, that's not.
I told Father David a story. Went through some of I don't ever throw anything away. I just can't find it. It's in the stack somewhere. And I had this little book that in 2017, 2018, I went up to Vermont to be with my friend Bob that had a shoulder replacement. But he was bound and determined that I was going to come back into the church. I'd been away 50 years almost. And so David and my friend Jenny, our priest up there in Vermont, came for Thanksgiving dinner, and I said, oh my God, Bob, what have you done to me? I'm gonna have to spend 3 hours with an Episcopal priest, and I says, what are you doing? Well, Jenny's this wonderful person that is just love incarnate. I mean, she puts her arms around you and you can feel the Holy Spirit. But anyway, I sat in the back of the church like this, saying, I'm not having any of it for, all of November and most of December. And finally, I said, okay, Jenny, let's talk. And so, and she said, well, I've got something for you. She says, the diocese is sponsoring a Bible study of the book of John, and it's with the Society of St. John the Evangelist in Boston. And every day there was a podcast, and you could take your notes, and every single day, and then at the end of the week, we'd meet in Jenny's office and discuss what happened during that week. And it was finding John, or finding the Gospel of John as a vehicle for finding Jesus' love. And it was a very powerful experience. And as it unfolded over time, it worked. And I came home and I continued that. And I don't know, I'm very, very tied to the Gospel of John because of that experience. And it was a powerful force in my life. And then I found all of you and things were, yeah, of course, I got ready to leave and Jenny said, come and talk to me. And I said, okay. And she said, I've already talked to Jamie Cunningham and I've talked to Father David. And she said, you will be there on Sunday morning. And she says, I told him you're coming. I said, thanks, Jenny. I said, my life is full of these very bossy women. So, anyway, didn't mean.
None of
to
them
go
were
off
in this
on a
room.
tangent.
But yeah, isn't that a great
It's a
story?
great story.
That's good.
Well, you make me think of something. Recently, I've been talking about working in the darkness. I mean, when you work in the darkness, when you deal with all that kind of stuff, it does skew the way you see things. And what helps me with this is why I talked about the light. Is through all that darkness of dealing with other people's darkness is I needed light from others. And it was that light that really, it can get pretty morbid. You're talking about, you like the darkness, but it can also get really, it's really dark.
Yeah.
And sometimes that darkness is really hard to get away from. Some folks that have done that work actually lose their mind, but if it wasn't for the light of people in my life. So that's what meant a lot to me, because you travel in the darkness for years and years and years. So it's a little caution.
Yeah. No, that's I think that's an important reminder.
Yeah, because every one of you has a light. Wilson's lighted up my day. You can listen up my day many a times. So my life. So.
We do have that ability to do that for others. Yeah. Amy spent years working with survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. So she was just immersed in darkness. And on some level, she's never. That's a tough thing to see day after day. And I've talked to people in law enforcement and just seeing how that can affect them. And I'm reminded that I spend my days around people I see people at their best. That's usually what I see. In law enforcement, a lot of these things, you see people at their worst. That's the whole focus of your work, and it takes a toll on you.
Did Casa, one case.
There you go. That's a great example. Yeah.
And it was so horrible,
Mhm.
so dark.
Mhm.
It almost destroyed me.
Mhm.
It was so intense. Those poor little kids, how that could happen.
Mhm.
Just, I guess I've been sheltered all my life or something like that. And it was on somebody hit me upside the head. How could that be possible? And I could only do that one case.
Yeah.
And it turned out wonderful. They got it.
Oh, wow.
It happened real, they're happy and all that kind of stuff now, but. I couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
It hurt too bad.
Yeah. Understand.
So you need another life.
Yeah, kind of counteracts the darkness.
Well, people used to ask me all the time, David, why do you put yourself through that? I was like, well, because this is what God has me doing. It's what God's plan.
It's needed.
Yeah, but like you were kind of suggesting, I think, I mean, we also need each other. We need companions. When Jesus sent the disciples out, he sent them by twos. Nobody does anything hardly by themselves. There's a good reason to, we need each other. Any other thoughts about any of these signs or I am statements or anything else in the Gospel of John?
I liked the, I am the gate. Um, in chapter 10, verse 7, Jesus says, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate to the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. Yeah. I liked that the sheep were listening.
And there were no wolves in sheep clothing.
Right. One of my favorite pieces of music is Fox and Say, Sheep May Save the Race. It's just gorgeous. Yeah, the image of kind of the sheep grazing safely in the presence of the Good Shepherd. It's just beautiful. Well, as I mentioned, next Sunday, we'll be wrapping up our discussion of the Gospel of John. We'll be preparing to move into Holy Week. And so we're going to focus on the Book of Glory, which really, I think most of the texts that we'll hear in Holy Week come from John. We're going to hear a lot of John between now and Easter. And much of John's language, as we've talked about a little bit, can be problematic, especially with regard to the way that he talks about the Jews. So that's something we'll talk about, some of the translational issues. I once went to a talk at the Presbyterian Seminary in Austin about Holy Week. And it was, it was just clergy people hearing about Holy Week and learning different aspects of Holy Week. And one of the speakers was a Jewish rabbi. And he said something that I've never forgotten, which is that while your Christian ancestors were celebrating Holy Week in villages throughout Europe, my ancestors were hiding in homes because they knew that Holy Week meant anti-Jewish fervor was going to be stirred up. And so that's always stuck with me. And a lot of that anti-Jewish language is rooted in John's Gospel. So we'll talk a little bit about that next Sunday, as well as other aspects of John's Book of Glory and the last days of Jesus. So thank you all very much.
Thank
you.
Fun discussion.
Seems like we have the freezer one out, and we have 2 casseroles and some soup. Lasagna, soup, chicken spaghetti casserole, and chicken sesame broccoli casserole. And we need to get rid of them because they're still frozen, but they're not totally frozen. So lasagna soup.
Sounds interesting.
Well, I think it's all the stuff in lasagna except a little bit of wet.
And you don't think you should refreeze them? I mean, they can go in the freezer
Well, they're already a little
Okay.
spongy.
yeah, take
And,
take some food home with you.
Yeah, take some food on. There's more where those came.
Yeah.
They're pretty easy to come by.
frozen, you can refreeze. Yeah, I mean, if they're still.
Do y'all want to look and decide?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why not? And then we'll, if they, you want me to, I'll take them there.
Now, we did not replace that freezer when we replaced the fridge. Is that correct? Okay.
And I think it might be going out. It's.
Sorry to give you that bad news.
It's a good, let it happen in a second.
Yeah.
That's appliances.
Father Dave, I got a,
Yeah, okay. Let's go, somebody. Me or
States donate
a lot of folks.
Good.
Mhm.
The rest of yours in my bag.
Yeah.
You know, you took a lot of that. Going back.
Okay, I
That's what Dr. Franklin tells me, remember, you can walk.
Yes, yes, and that's important.
Do anybody, if you come from a household with kids, can you give me just a second?
Let's see how this records.
Yeah. We need your 1x30 laundry dogs.
Well, yeah.
It definitely generated some discussion, but I was glad we were talking to some of the veterans. And we had one discussion of. Yeah. It was a cancer bill and. Why I continued on in the doing the work that I was doing was as that forgiveness happened. It was because of dealing with it in other ways. For example, they're talking about, well, I hate it. Osama bin Laden.
Mhm.
Well, I remember